Hello and good morning. Long time no see, eh? It's been about a year since I did my last video. I've done lots of re-educating, taken on a couple more courses and completed those. Most recently, the last one was a trauma-informed life coaching. So, in that, I want to start off with saying I'm seeing so much change happen right now and understanding with regards to narcissism and the language around toxic behaviors. And I'm pleased with that. At the same time, though, there is the other side of that coin where we're seeing a lot of misunderstanding happen about what narcissism is. And every educator or therapist goes through that as we begin to understand the dynamic that toxic behaviors create in our life and the life of the clients that we're working with. There are plenty of educated people out there who are doing their best and don't intend to misinform as they help people transition out of the suffering that they've experienced or are experiencing and into a more healthier, productive lifestyle. So, the topic that I'm focusing on today is transference. The transference is happening in a number of ways, but it's not just a focus of transference that I want to acknowledge here today. It's some of the dangers that are happening because of therapy styles and misinformation, but the modalities that are being used and the personal understanding of the practitioner, and then that being taken into the lives of their clients without the proper skill sets of challenging distortions and faulty thinking. And a lot of clients don't have the understanding of what distortion and faulty thinking are and how these things are impacting their life. So I've decided to break it down into a few short 10-minute videos and see what I can do for my own people that I work with as reminders so that they can go back and review the things we've talked about in session. Okay, so I have been doing sessions with individuals using CBT, life coaching, lifestyle rehabilitation is what I call it, using CBT for a long time. Officially, only over the last few years, and now it has a very trauma-informed approach. One of the things that trauma-informed course really hit home for me, or really helped to hit home for me, was the amount of denial and the lack of challenging faulty thinking and distortions in therapy these days. And since COVID happened, we've had fantastic access to mental health supports. There's a lot of therapy going on over Zoom or over telephone, through text, through Messenger, all kinds of different platforms, and a lot of life coaching from various different people, from various different cultures, that is really, really useful to understand how and why we are experiencing things the way we are. In the last year, I watch an average, when I can, on my way back and forth to work, when I have downtime, my re-education time, I need a minimum of 20, but usually about 60 hours a year of re-education, just to stay updated. But that minimum, I have to choose selectively those people. So I try to keep a main group of educators or psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists that I use to learn from, right? Just like teachers. Some of them are great. Some of them I've come to see. I think I'm going to drop them, off that list because there's a lot of transference, or there's a lot of opinion that doesn't have evidence for that thinking or that style to be used. And in the trauma-informed life coaching, it really drives home the distorted thinking and the evidence-based change that needs to happen. So, when I'm looking at transference, what does transference mean? That's when we feel, or we're listening to something, for instance, and we are remembering our own experience and then applying those feelings to the person, or applying our situation to their situation. When we've come from a completely different place. It could be something like an experience at work with a boss. It could be a parent. It could be siblings. It could be a friend or a neighbor. And we have this similar experience, and maybe it was terrible, maybe it was wonderful, but we transfer our feelings or our thinking onto that person. Similar to projection, but not. So, when we hear something, especially if we're in a therapeutic relationship with them as a therapist, we hear something from a client, we can understand we're taught to have some compassion, to be able to see where they're coming from, but maintain boundaries. Life coaching has different boundaries than psychotherapy does. Psychiatry has different boundaries than a CBT therapist would. And there's all kinds of there's a huge spectrum of practitioners that offer therapeutic styles that might differ, or might overlap, or be similar. So we get to choose who we go to, because going to a therapist is just like looking for a car. Not everyone is going to fit us. We don't just jump into the first car we see. Some of them still have, ticks and bangs in the engine. Some of them are narrower wheelbase than others, and it's all about preference, right? So when we're looking for a therapist, we need to find somebody who's going to challenge our thinking. Not you're not thinking right. That's not necessarily a challenge. But a question like, I'm noticing that, or tell me more about that. Or forget the How about, why are you thinking that? What evidence do you have for that thinking? Straight up, right? Share with me how you came to that conclusion, please. It's not confrontational. It's matter of fact in a lot of times. Sometimes it's softer, and we're bringing that client around to being able to look at their own thinking. But a lot of times it's matter of fact, and we have only so much time with each client, usually about an hour. And we have to think about doing this in a way that isn't going to re-victimize that client, open them up to the wounds of their perceived experience, and then just leaving them hanging because we don't have the time. We only have an hour, and by the time we're just getting into the nuts and bolts, it's time to end that session. Now, the unfair advantage with many regulated practitioners or professionals, psychotherapists they have an allotted agreed time. They don't go over that time. That's one of the boundaries of their work. A life coach may have a more open boundary about that time. They may book you a 2-hour section, and you may choose only to use an hour of it, or you may use 2.5 because you're doing different type of work, and you're choosing as the client with that therapist. There's an agreement or an arrangement that you're going to choose to continue the work if that therapist has the time and has given you that allotment. Maybe you're ready to do the next step, and in fact 2.5 hours is what you need. However, most often a therapist has a 1-hour section or a half an hour section. You have just enough time to review what is upsetting you, to get into the nuts and bolts, the painful parts, and then they'll give you an exercise or something to do through the week. And then you're left there thinking about those open wounds, feeling those open wounds. When we are trying to connect with our clients and feeling with compassion, there's a lot of difference with different practitioners and modalities. A psychiatrist is unable to do a lot of that talk therapy with you in most cases. They're trained with pharmaceutical meds. They're looking at neurochemical function or dysfunction and how to stabilize or balance that. Excuse me. Whereas a counselor or talk therapist, psychotherapist, is trained with more, could be DBT, could be CBT, could be psychotherapy styles, could be many different ways to help you talk through or to familiarize yourself with the emotions and feelings you're having, the thoughts that you're having, and how that's affecting your behavior. That's CBT in a nutshell. But you may not have the ability in one modality to really get into where that person is coming from, or to feel compassion for them. Where in another modality, you are trained. For instance, in Indigenous CBT, which is part of my training, we're taught to bring our experiences to that healing circle. We are equal in that circle, and though we're the therapist, or we're there as a guide through the struggle and teaching you how to think differently about something, we're bringing as much of our own experience as we can. Where a psychiatrist isn't trained like that. A psychotherapist might not be trained that way. A social worker isn't trained that way. Or social service worker. They're not trained like that. So they don't have those skill sets. That's why one reason it's important to figure out who you're seeing and what their education or skill set is, and also asking questions and being able to challenge that style of therapy when you're in it and it doesn't fit for you. So, for instance, a CBT therapist who has the Indigenous style may bring more of themselves and their experience, but their training is going to have to include more about transference, because that is typically where we may trip a little bit, because we have the ability to feel compassion. We're bringing our experiences and feelings there, but we have to practice more in the boundary work, where we're looking at, is this my feeling, or is this what I'm hearing from the client? And if it's what you're hearing from the client, and your experience may be similar but very different in more ways than not, if you're looking or coming to the conclusions you are because of what you experienced and not what the client is bringing forward, that's you not doing enough work with your boundaries and a lot of transference. But if you're coming to these conclusions based on evidence for the thinking and for the assumptions, or reviewing the distorted thought patterns or distorted thinking that we can get into, like filtering or black and white thinking, or catastrophic thinking, for instance. These filters that we start to see things through, they affect our ability to give good advice. So the work is really needs to be done around our boundaries and how we're delivering that therapeutic, whether it's an intervention or a healing style. Okay, so transference. Now, they're all gassed up and ready to go. So when a practitioner has to really work those boundaries and study what transference is and how they can practice transference, how it can affect the client, that's going to happen more, I think, in somebody who has studied a modality or who uses a modality where they're required to bring their own experience to the table. Whereas in a psychotherapy or a different type of counseling, they're required to keep a very firm boundary and a distance almost. Okay, how does that transference affect our ability to offer good lifestyle rehabilitation supports? When we're going into a therapist's office, we're struggling with something, and we're trying to have or find a way that we can understand what we're thinking and feeling and how it affects us. But at the same time, we've probably got something that somebody has done to us in our opinion. So it could be a neighbor, for instance. A neighbor reacted very poorly, or caused a scene, or got very upset with you about something. And so you're going to go into the therapist office and say, oh my God, my neighbor, the other morning they came out and they yelled at me because my garbage cans were still sitting at the end of the lane, the day before, really late, but I got home late from work, so I didn't have time to clean them up. And they're my garbage cans and it's my driveway. And why are they, going off about my garbage cans? They've got their own to worry about, right? Like, it's none of their business. They must just be a jerk. And so we've had an experience where with someone has done something to us, and so we're there trying to work through that experience, which is very real and valid, but we've spent the last however long since this neighbor incident thinking about it and feeling it, and our distortions may actually have affected the way we were remembering it, and any number of issues that we may not be looking at things objectively. We may not have the skill sets to be able to say, well, now wait a minute. I saw an ambulance there last week, and haven't, I don't know them well enough to check in, but I wonder if that had something to do with their, extreme grumpiness, or their reactivity, or their upset about garbage cans. Because why would anyone get upset about garbage cans, really? It could be that neighbor's partner or husband or wife got taken to the hospital and had a significant diagnosis that's going to disrupt their life. It may be that it had nothing to do with that ambulance, or that they've lost their pet, or had an argument with someone in their life, and so they're very upset, and that came out with you when they were trying to talk to you about bringing in your garbage cans. Maybe they have someone coming to buy the house, and who knows what their justification is, but there's a reason for their behavior. People don't just do things because, right? And that's valid. At the same time, our experiences and our perception of that experience is also valid. So the therapist needs to be able to say, hey, this happened. I recognize that. I'm validating that you experienced this. And what evidence do we have for how we think about it? What evidence do we have that your neighbor is just a jerk? Could it be that something else is going on? Now, here's where people don't often get pushed. When you go to therapy, you don't want to have somebody challenge your thinking. You don't want to sit in that discomfort of your own process. That's not why many people think they're going to therapy. Many people think they're going to therapy to be told, you're absolutely right, that person is a jerk, and here's how you cut them off or handle it. But that's not a good therapist, because a good therapist, a good professional, or a qualified, educated, and healthy professional isn't going to say, oh yeah, your perception is absolutely bang on, exactly, and not challenge you, because people don't work like that. We all have perceptions. We all have opinions. What we don't all have is someone to help us challenge our thinking and our feelings in those ways that would change the behaviors and the ways that we respond. Okay, so that was a start to the topic of transference and therapeutic healthy relationships. And why am I talking about this? Because there's a lot of people out there that are spending money, a lot of money, on therapy, and they're going to therapists, to be told what they want to hear. And some of them are not going all the time and doing the work. Some of them are going and saying they can go to that they're going to therapy, and maybe it's once a month for an hour. Maybe it's once every couple of months because that's all they can afford. But what are they doing in the meantime? What homework are you taking home with you? Because that hour of therapy is not enough once a month, or once every couple of months, or even once every other week. That hour, is only to give you the tip of the iceberg of the work that you need to be doing in order to change the lifestyle or the thinking patterns that you have that are keeping you stuck. And if we don't have a therapist who challenges our thinking, our feelings, and asks us, what evidence do you have? And does this fit any of the distorted thinking patterns that we know? Does this fit, does this kind of thinking sound like and give you a description of fixed thinking patterns, or filtering, or black and white thinking, or well, let's stop there. Any of those kinds of faulty thinking, or distorted beliefs, distorted thoughts that lead us into these distorted belief systems, ideals, because we have ideals built on what our experiences are, what our interpretation or worldview is, what our schemas are. And without having somebody teach us, reteach us what a healthy, non-fixed or flexible thinking looks like, we're going into that professional's office looking to be told what we want to hear. And then when we're challenged on our thinking, we sort of push against the therapist. We're there paying for their expertise. But if they're telling us what we want to hear, that's not actually helping us. And maybe we are thinking accurately. Maybe we are thinking with flexible thinking. Maybe we aren't using cognitive distortions. And that's something that we can actually work out and see in therapy as well. But the therapist will have evidence for that. Here's why that's not black and white thinking, right? Here's why you have a balanced approach to analyzing the situation, and that's really good. And they'll give you that positive, constructive feedback. And even if there's an unhealthy thinking style or some distortion there, they can tell you, here's how that's fixed thinking, or here's how that is filtering, or black and white thinking. And here's why it's not helpful to your healing or to your objective, because you're coming here for a lifestyle rehabilitation. And if we don't change the way we think, we can't rehabilitate our lifestyle, because our thinking drives our lifestyle, right? Our ideals. Our ideals then drive what we're thinking and feeling, and just like our thinking, and how we're behaving. So other people are going to interpret what we're putting out. We may not even recognize what we're putting out. So I want to leave it there. That's a lot to think on. And I'm going to move into, in the next video, how we can accept the challenge of that therapeutic relationship, or that person, that therapist, how they challenge us and why they should challenge us. Because looking for good therapy is just as important as getting it. And we can't wander around the world with skewed views or ideals that are destructive or self-absorbed or distorted or harmful. Sometimes we're raised with ideals that are supposed to be really good. Our entire culture has these ideals. But when you move out of that small community or culture, your ideals are actually harmful to the greater community. Maybe that's the situation. And if we don't look at what our part is and how we think, then we can't change the lifestyle or the behaviors. Then we can't change the reactivity, or we can't change the reactivity, but we can't change our own reactivity or our own responses into healthier responses, because we're not aware that there's anything wrong with our thinking. So I'll leave it there. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for the time that you spent, the 20 minutes, not 25 minutes almost, of your day. I really do appreciate that. I hope that you got something out of this video, and that the coming videos are going to also be supportive. Okay, see you tomorrow.